All right. Well, welcome everyone. I love the fact that Zoom has become so ubiquitous that everybody's meetings start with, "Can you hear me? Are we on? Are we live? Are we?" I don't know if I've shared with you all the cartoon. I should probably find it. That says that Zoom meetings are like a seance. They all start with, "It's dark, but can you hear me? I can't see you. I get a feeling someone is there." It's like, yep. We're all holding hands around the Ouija board. So good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are in the world, and welcome to Creating the Future's integrity meeting for the month of August 2021. I want to remind anybody who is watching, and there's a couple of people who said they were going to be watching, we would love you to participate in all aspects of the meeting, including when we're sharing what's been exciting in our lives. Just use the hashtag on Twitter. It's the only place we'll look, the hashtag of creating the future. And hopefully we will be up and running and you'll be able to be joining in, because this is going to be a fun one. We are still waiting on Eli, who hopefully is going to join us soon, and Sandy, but we'll get started in the interest of time. I am Hildy Gottlieb, and I would like to ask us all to just introduce yourself, tell us where you are, what your weather's been like, and something that's been meaningful or exciting or awesome in your lives. And I will leave it to you all to just start whenever.
Go ahead, Carl.
So hello, everyone. I'm Carl Wilding. I'm Creating the Future's European outpost here just north of London in England and the UK, where currently it is very grey and very wet, which apparently is going to be the normal English summer on this day when the IPCC report is released about climate change. We're going to have to get used to it being very wet and possibly a bit warm as well. In terms of awesome, well, I mean, it's the summer, isn't it? So it's good to be alive despite it sort of raining, and it's good to have, as I was discussing with Hildy just before, it's good to have all the family here back from university or college and so on. And it's good to be amongst friends here, so that's awesome too.
Wonderful. It is always good to see you.
Thank you, Carl. I am Justin Pollock, so I am in Washington, D.C., squatting on what was formerly land that the Nacotchtank tribe lived upon and relied on. And it is hot here. We had a beautiful week last week that was nothing like a D.C. summer, but now we are back to a D.C. summer. We would love to have some of the monsoons of Arizona and some of the rain and coolness of London, but it is what it is here. And my awesome is that my family is all back in the house. I spent, my girls were off at camp for 4 weeks. And during that time, my wife was also gone for 2 weeks. So I went from a year and a half of never having a moment to myself to like 2 weeks of solitude, and I'm very grateful to have everybody back in the house, and yeah, figuring out how to step on each other's toes gracefully again.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Jackie, how about you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jackie Bradley. I am calling from Michigan in the United States. Our weather is also unseasonably warm. We're about 90 degrees right now, which is pretty warm for the upper Midwest. And I think all of my awesomes have been about my garden. So I'm going to continue that trend because we are in full abundance right now. I've been eating lots of tomatoes and cucumber sandwiches and berries right out of the garden. And it's all been very exciting to me.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Our garden is reduced to just sunflowers this year. And I do lament, we've been winnowing down and because we travel so much and we're hoping we'll be able to travel again. So we've been sort of winnowing down and I am always jealous of your garden reports. Wonderful. How about you, Dimitri?
There's been so many awesomes that it's hard to pick just one to talk about today. I mean, Hildy talked about us having been on the road, and we saw a family and got to see my granddaughter for the first time, which was totally amazing. Probably the most recent one, and I'll save the others for other times, is the monsoons that you were talking about, Justin. There was so much rain that happened while we were gone, and then we got back and there was more storms, that the normally dry riverbeds, which are river beds, were flowing to such a degree that they were literally bank to bank. And I'm talking about, 150 yards wide or more, almost 2 football fields wide, that were running just tons and tons of water and debris and stuff. So that was just completely and totally amazing and awesome, and speaks to the desert having been completely bone dry for years, and in a snap of a finger can be a huge waterlogged flooding place. So it's pretty awesome.
It has been incredibly awesome. I am Hildy Gottlieb. I am also in Tucson, Arizona, which is the unceded territory of the Tohono O'odham. And it's been just a month of awesomes. We were on the road for 3 weeks, which was delightful. A week of it was with family, and we hadn't had all our kids together since the beginning of the pandemic. So we rented a house, and all the kids were together, and the baby, and that was awesome. We got to spend another week and a half by ourselves, exploring things that we had never seen along the coast in California, which was very cool. Just slowly meandering, which was beyond awesome. And thought we were coming home to dive into work, and the storms were so spectacular, and the hiking and the desert being green was just so spectacular. I've been posting about it on my Instagram. If you guys want to take a look at the pictures, it's just remarkable. And so we wound up taking another week of vacation just to go, look, the rivers are flowing. And it's been really, really, really delightful. And then we spent the weekend watching movies. Everything from the Anthony Bourdain documentary to a very sweet movie called Swan Song, that if you have the chance to see it, is just very, very sweet. To yesterday, we watched a Fellini movie. So it is like everything and in between. So it's just been all kinds of awesomes, which has been quite delightful. I guess the other awesome personally is that I've been writing. I have been beginning the gathering of information to write the book on catalytic thinking. And so that's pretty exciting. I have been devoting an hour every single day diligently to writing the book, which I'm really, really getting very excited about. So life is good. Life is good. And I have really been looking forward to this conversation. I'm hoping Eli is going to be joining us. One of the awesomes was we got to spend time with Eli and his partner when we were in the Bay Area, which was just awesome and wonderful. And Sandy was going to join us as well. So we will hopefully be seeing folks. To lay some groundwork about where we are and where we're heading, sort of bring us up to speed after it's been a couple of months since our June meeting. You all will recall that we talked about what's next for creating the future. We talked about the fact that we are in that stepping into what's next phase in terms of we no longer need to be proof of concept. We know catalytic thinking catalyzes change. And we don't need to prove it anymore. And we're starting to apply it in different ways, sharing our education programs, formalizing our experimenting as a way of being into programs that will help people experiment on their own. And as we started to talk about all of that, and we started to talk about what needs to be in place for creating the future to step into what's next, a couple things became really obvious in terms of our own internal conditions for success. One was about hiring. We need to hire a bunch of people. If we're going to really be expanding what we're doing, we need to hire a bunch of people. That could be contracting, it could be hiring as staff. I'm going to use staff and hiring as a placeholder of what the relationship is, but we need to add people. And that we can no longer rely just on volunteers who are very, very well-meaning, working on stipend wages. If we're really going to scale our impact, we really need to be looking at creating infrastructure. What that led to was a second observation around succession planning, that as the organization grows, it needs to outgrow its founders. So really thinking about what is next in terms of systems replacing reliance on individuals. The perfect example that Dimitri just sitting here trying to figure out getting us online, and there needs to be an IT person who does that, and Dimitri just attends. Or doesn't. We could be really bad board members and just never show up. So succession planning was another piece of that, and then that leads to talking about how we resource that. We have in the past we have eschewed many forms of traditional fundraising that went counter to our values, and that has led to very, very tiny budgets. We do an immense amount of good for very little money. And again, if we're going to put the infrastructure in place to really scale, you can't do that the way we've done it. And so what we realized is that all of the infrastructure and the people and the succession planning really relies on the resourcing. And so that's where we figured we would start. And we will be, this is a really big test of our integrity board, because the one place that people tend to say, yeah, that's our values, but we need money, is in resourcing. And if this body is about holding us true to our values, then this is going to be a real huge test of that. I will share my screen for those who may be watching or may watch afterwards. We will put the URL in the chat, and you can see it on our homepage, that this is the blog post that describes today's conversation. We will be using catalytic thinking. The link to this chart is in that blog post, but we will really be playing today in whose lives will be affected by any actions we take, how will we listen to those folks, what will it take to engage them and involve them in the questions. Again, this is the list of catalytic thinking questions, which again is at that blog post. So for anyone who is watching, just head to our homepage and you'll find the link to that blog post there. And Eli is with us. Yay.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm sorry I was running late today. I also had trouble finding the link, but here I am.
Oh, goodness. Well, we are glad that you are here. Do you want to quickly share something that is awesome in your life? I have already shared that one of my awesomes was that we got to see you and Stephanie.
Oh yeah, that was an incredible, awesome. This weekend, I was at the Legion of Honor Museum in San Francisco, and I got to see an incredible gallery by a Kenyan artist, Wangeshi Mutu, which was just soul-wrenching and beautiful at the same time. She takes a lot of her Kenyan history and the politics of Kenya and African colonialism and women being oppressed, and then synthesizes it with hope for a new future where women are respected. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful exhibit that everyone should see. Wangeshi Mutu is her name, M-U-T-U. I'll put her name in the chat.
Please, yeah. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Awesome. Does anybody have any thoughts before we dive in and start applying catalytic thinking to this ever important issue of resourcing? Any thoughts about, did I miss anything in my sum up?
I don't know if I'm already going into the sort of the sort of conversation that I think we're going to have, but I guess as I was sat here when you were introducing the topic and thinking about this, I was thinking about sort of how the world has changed in terms of organizations and networks and so on. And I guess for me, for my preamble, it's that this is not about getting money for an organization to scale and grow an organization. It's about scaling and growing a network and a set of values and a set of ways of working and ideas. And that requires you to sort of use that trendy term to unlearn how we've sort of done things in the past. And again, what has just sort of made me think a bit about that is that with COVID and the fact that people aren't going into an office and there isn't that traditional sort of infrastructure, I think we have to be clear about what is the infrastructure that's needed for the sort of distributed approach that we've been talking about for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts before we get started? So let's start with the very, very first question in catalytic thinking. Who will be affected by the conversation that we're having, by the way we choose to resource this work? Who will be affected by that? And I'm gonna like get the pot started. Over the years, as we've had this conversation on and off and on and off, and usually it's been internally, there hasn't been a lot of board and public conversation about it. It's been more theoretical and we've touched on it. But every time it comes up and every time we blog about it, people are cheering us on, saying we need to find a different way. And so I think that in terms of who will be affected, it is people working within social change under the current paradigm where money stops everything. And I know that's really broad, but it's that one is just a big one that maybe can prime the pot.
Yes, I was going a little bit more pragmatic. So whomever is going to be involved in asking somebody else for an investment of funds and or other assets, and the actual people being asked. So not the objectified thing, but the actual person being asked. So if that's a program officer, if it's a donor, if it's, you know, the guy driving by in his car on the street, whatever the methodology is.
Who else?
Well, if we're going to zoom out, and this will be a tool for systems change, this affects everyone on the planet at some level.
So I'll zoom back in then, Eli, and say that if we can make the model work, the people that I think potentially most affected are the people who were sort of trying to engender social change at the coalface, who get into this stuff because they are good at doing things like building the capacity of communities and so on. And actually, they're not very good at fundraising. And they didn't get into this because they wanted to do fundraising, but it's a necessary evil of why they do it. So that's why so many people are cheering Hildy on, is because lots of people are motivated and want to do the social change work. They don't want to do the fundraising work, which at times, you only need to look at the stuff that Vu is writing about community-centric fundraising, all the stuff that comes with normal fundraising in terms of power relationships, that sort of asymmetry there, and some of it is quite demeaning, isn't it?
Yeah. It's also, it's interesting. We did not do traditional fundraising for two reasons. One, every time we brought it up, it went so counter to our values of filling out grants because the people with money believe they have the power to ask us all kinds of questions. The power dynamic thing. Every time teams got together to talk about this, it was so distasteful to step into a power dynamic that we would really like to see dismantled. That if we're talking about what is post-capitalism, then what builds on what we did and does this in a more human-centered way. Okay, so that's one reason. But the other reason was really what you're getting to, Carl, in that we didn't start creating the future because we love fundraising or because we wanted to spend a lot of time doing it. And what became clear, especially in the beginning, and I frequently use the word proof of concept. In the early days, we were an idea and we were teaching that idea and people were putting that idea into practice. If you're a startup of anything, if you're a startup of a food bank or a homeless shelter where you're doing a thing for people, you're not going to raise a lot of money. You're not going to get significant enough grants, certainly, to fund everything you need to do. You're going to scrape, you're going to get what they call in the trade go away money, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, now go away. And you're winding up spending all of your time begging for $5,000 and $10,000. What we chose to do was to figure out how we would raise the money and do the work. Because if you're spending all your time, especially as founders, raising money, you're not doing the work. And we chose to, whether it was, you can call it earned income, do it through teaching classes, through small donations, through, we had a wonderful donation early on that said, I believe in what you're doing. We never asked for money. This person came to us and said, I believe in what you're doing. What can I do to help? But it really was a trade-off of time. Yeah, Carl.
So I want to first of all go do what Eli did and go back out again. And it's interesting when you sort of say how much time any individual ED or whoever spends on applying for relatively small amounts of grant funding, at the system level, it is incredibly wasteful. And so there's something about trying to improve this stuff that once you multiply the individual experiences and episodes and you multiply that to the level of the system, actually it leads to a much better and much more efficient system, because it's just an incredibly wasteful system at the moment in terms of the success rate of applications. I've no idea what it is in percentage terms, but like even you see this in academic funding, where even the success rate of what they call A-star funding here, it's something like 10% or something like that. So like you have like 90% of like grant fund applications that would score A-star, and they can't fund them because there isn't enough money. And then once you multiply all the time of the people sort of doing that, so that's incredibly sort of wasteful. But then the other thing that you made me sort of think about, and like you might think I've got this completely wrong, but sort of here you go, is that going back to the individual level, the response to that sort of demeaning sort of charity, sort of going cap in hand to a funder, almost like one of the responses to that was social enterprise. So going out and earning. But the problem, of course, with social enterprise is that it marketizes the relationship, and it turns everything that you do into a sort of a product, and it turns the person into a number and so on. And you know, I mean, it leads to this sort of like measurement culture where we actually forget that it's human beings that we're sort of talking about. So at the risk of sort of like just appearing like this sort of like utopian sort of idiot, and there's got to be a different way that's about trying to aggregate people's support without marketizing it, but equally doing it in a way that leaves everybody's dignity intact. And we may or may not stumble across this. I don't know, but these are the sorts of things that people are looking for when, again, sorry if I sound like some sort of like idiot, but I was reading something this morning that was sort of saying like that the neoliberal consensus that has existed since the 1960s or 70s, that stopped in 2008-9 in a crash, and everyone is now looking for something different. And we have a funding system that is shaped by that neoliberal consensus, and everyone wants the next consensus, but we haven't quite found it yet.
Yeah.
Carl, sort of playing off of what you just said and what Eli was talking about from a big picture standpoint, the zooming out, this has the potential of affecting everything, not just fundraising. It is a values-based approach that even the way the work is done in a very mechanical environment that might be a food bank, that might be the collection and distribute, that sort of warehousing component of it, because there's a lot of other human interaction components, but just that, how much do I have to report? I mean, when you talk to a food bank, they're talking about tonnage, and they have to monitor and weigh and determine what a pallet is and whatnot, just to report the tons of food that they have distributed. So they have to report that because they're reporting it for the funding sources, and the funding sources are saying, we want accountability. Accountability is, give me numbers, and the numbers are rarely impact. They're almost always some mechanical response to tons is in the food bank. So I think that this effort, in terms of who it affects, it potentially affects absolutely everyone, and that's going to what Eli said. But looking at it from the micro to the macro, each layer is being affected because the values change that has happened at basically the input point, where resources are coming in. And if you continue that up the chain, it changes entire organizations, it changes communities, it changes everything on something that seems not simple, but not part of the big picture. We're going to get funding, except it changes everything.
Yeah, and that sort of leads me to be thinking about, there are so many foundation leaders. It's real easy to point fingers and to say they're the evil ones, they're the ones setting the rules, they're the ones making people jump through hoops. They don't like it. They really don't like it. So in terms of people looking for alternatives, folks in foundations, large and small, are looking for alternatives. There is a relatively new movement towards participatory funding, participatory grant making, that I'm seeing a lot of actually coming out of the UK, Carl. There you go.
Yeah, just come out.
Yeah.
Modern grant making.
Yep. And again, that's coming from foundation people. It's coming from folks who are equally dissatisfied from a values place. That, I've been talking a lot lately, given what we're stepping into at Creating the Future, I've been talking a lot lately about using tools of power and privilege to try and dismantle power and privilege. And that's what the whole funding cycle is about. It is all power and privilege. It is frequently money that came from extracting it from either the earth or from people 100, 200 years ago. If you look at the largest foundations, both globally and in the United States, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the go down the list of individuals who made a ton of money by extracting it from humans or the earth, and they're dissatisfied. So I think that there's a big piece in there in terms of who would be affected, of foundation leaders that want something different.
I think to target a little bit more Hildy of the group, sort of people working in social change, and I kind of hear Vu's voice in my ear, which is, I think there is some distinction to be made between progressive folks in the world of nonprofits versus conservative. And so let me just, I'll say that those that, hopefully would be affected by this are the nonprofit professional and advisory class. So the people who are giving the advice on how things should be run. So, I'm hoping that group of people is, going along your sort of line, Hildy, of it. What I was thinking about, though, with some of the things, Dimitri, that you were talking about, and Carl, some of the things you were talking about, is I do think that there is a distinction we should be aware of behaviors that are in the, sort of more progressive side of the nonprofit and community benefit sector versus the conservative side, which I'll still call nonprofit, and because of my own bias, won't say community benefit. But as Vu has pointed out with some of these things, I think there are some distinctions that are important as we think about, which I know sort of goes to what's the intended outcome and some of the shifting and thinking that people are talking about. But, I was thinking about, Dimitri, what you were talking about, which is we have this model. And again, I think these are more progressive behaviors than they are conservative. So that behavior of it's, dollars to outcomes is the equation, as opposed to assets to outputs. Or I'm sorry, dollars to outputs is what you were talking about, Dimitri, versus assets to outcomes. So those have two distinct things, and sort of the the principled giving versus project giving. So, and again, I think that actually we see a model on the more conservative side of things that they actually are very outcomes oriented, very principles based, rather than building the levee to try and redirect the harmful water. They're willing to re-engineer the whole river and to throw as much money forward up front as possible to make the giant investment to make the movement that needs to be made. So I think some of it is not necessarily just to disparage one side or the other, but I think, there are actually examples of the kind of philanthropic investment, literally the release of wealth. I mean, the release of wealth on the conservative side from these foundations is so different from the release of wealth on the progressive foundation side, which I think a lot of us sort of are aspirational and almost envious of. Like, what would it look like for, I'm totally jumping the gun, but let's say there was somebody who said, we love the principle of what you're talking about with movement building. Here's $20 million. Have fun. Just do what you're going to do to move levers and create outcomes in society around it. So I guess there is a piece of me that we sort of may need to parse out a little bit of sort of what's going on with sub audiences within that advisory philanthropy class of people that we're trying to influence.
Absolutely.
So if I may jump in, I can't stop thinking about Mackenzie Scott. and her disruption of philanthropy as we know it. I read her article, and she broke down all the, institutions and nonprofits she donated to. And I kept looking for this word I had found in other kind of research about philanthropy, and I finally found it, trust-based philanthropy. I'm not sure if it's something that we're all kind of familiar with. But the question is, what led her to do what she did? And who are the other people who are on that same level and spectrum? And how do we, right, bring that forth and help others in the philanthropy space to cross over to the other side? I mean, Mackenzie Scott clearly, I quickly looked up a story, and she came from wealth at one level, but also there were some problems, some serious problems, which led to a family bankruptcy, and she had to kind of, do this work at Princeton and take on all these jobs. So I feel like everyone can connect at some level, right, to the other, to the underprivileged and under-resourced. So looking closely at kind of what has worked for some people who've made the jump, I think could be helpful for us in determining what are the levers, right? What are the questions that can get some of these entrenched entities to look at things differently?
Yeah, I think the individual philanthropist thing is really important. And it's interesting, the degree to which there are so many different kinds of philanthropists is how many different kinds of people there are. There's people who think of themselves as philanthropists. There's people who just write very large checks and don't think of themselves as philanthropists. There's people who write lots and lots of small checks and don't think of themselves as philanthropists, and everything in between. And one of the things that's always been interesting to me is the outsized influence of foundations compared to the dollars that they give. Every study ever, for all the years that I've been in this work, which is 30, it shows that foundation giving is a very, very small part of the pie of total giving in the world, and certainly in the US. Yet, because foundations are the ones who have rules, they're the ones that seem to set the policy of what everybody's going to. So when they said, what is their name? The watchdogs. Charity
Navigator.
Charity Navigator. When they decided like 20 years ago that you should only be spending 10% on overhead, that became a thing because they were talking about foundations, and that became a thing everywhere. Foundations took it up, and then once that happened, all donors said only 10% on overhead. And then 20 years later, when they finally went, oh, you can't do anything on that, we're sorry. Again, it is the tail wagging the dog. Dimitri Petropoulos, what did you just do?
I had a headache. I feel better now. So.
Jeez, please. And so I'm struck by the in terms of who would be affected by whatever we do. The next question being, what does it take to engage them and involve them in the conversation so that we're all doing it together, we're all creating it together, co-creating it. The unfortunate circumstance that foundations are A, easy to find, and B, seem to be leaders in where people go, where individual philanthropists, where organizations, nonprofits who are seeking funding go. Social enterprises also seek funding. Many social enterprises are tax exempt and walk both lines. And so I think that the foundations who are setting that pace.
But I'd like to drop back down sort of closer to the center of these concentric circles, which is really thinking about the people who are doing work sort of on behalf of catalytic thinking or creating the future in the movement. So I know I mentioned earlier sort of the people involved in the asking and being asked about the funding, but just the result of any of this funding, whatever model you use, is directly going to impact those who are doing the work, because it has the potential to give them the financial security to be able to choose to do the work.
Yeah, well, and to me, that gets back to Eli's, everybody will be impacted because the work will be done better. When you've got a small team, a small, really ragtag team of volunteers working with stipend wages, there's a different level of work because they can't devote full time to it. So it's literally a matter of focus. If you have someone who is paid a living wage to actually get the job done, very, very different than someone who is paid a stipend wage to fit it in with the rest of the stuff they do to actually support themselves. So I think that the impact on the programs of everything that Creating the Future does, Justin, is really part of that.
So can I then go one in on possibly one out on Justin's concentric circle, and then I'd say that the people that these programs ultimately are supporting will benefit from this approach, because one of the things that I'm pretty sure that you see all the time with organizations that chase a particular foundation or a donor and about what they want, is that you end up doing what they want, and they are not the experts. The experts are the people who deliver on the ground, and the experts are the people who actually experience the problem, and they have expertise through experience. So too often in philanthropy, you get these programs that are I guess sort of the playthings of sort of like people who want to do some good, but for them it's based on a hunch. It's not based on actually what works, and what works sometimes can be very counterfactual. So and again, I may not be up to date here in terms of where the research currently is, but I'm pretty sure that there's a reasonable amount of research out there that says that direct cash transfers work. Trust people to spend it on stuff that they know will make them happier or make a difference in their lives and so on. But that sort of direct cash transfers, they are, I don't know if anathema is too strong a word for many foundations and philanthropists, but I don't get the impression that they're widely supported, put it that way.
Yeah, it is. It's a really, that's sparking, Carl. The we love what you're doing. One of you, I can't remember who it was, mentioned, we love what you're doing, here's $20 million. Or we love what you're doing, here's $20,000. Go do it. No application, no blah, blah, blah. I was speaking with, here in the US, and I don't know the degree to which it is common elsewhere, there is a phenomenon called payday loans, which is usurious, 300, 400% interest. I mean, you might as well go to a loan shark. It is a loan shark. It's a legal loan shark. There's a group in Omaha, Nebraska that started a nonprofit, in essence, substitute for payday loans. And very much like microloans for businesses, these are microloans for humans. And again, the rate of return is ongoing. I mean, it is exactly what they've documented in microloans for businesses, that the overwhelming majority of people pay back the loan. When I asked the gentleman who is running this program, and he has got almost 30 years of banking. So this is a guy who didn't come out of nonprofit. He didn't come out of human services. He came out of banking, and wound up in charge of looking at what does it take to help people in circumstances where they don't have a bank account, they don't have to get underserved folks in the banking world. And the thing that he said is two things that occurred to me that struck me. One was that their application, I said, how do you decide? He said, I've been at this for 30 years. I just know. I went, oh, it's human, it's relationship. It was just this perfect, which is what y'all are saying, what is it? Okay, we've got a relationship here. Take this, go do something really good with it. The other thing I thought was really, really interesting, and we're hearing this a lot now, and I'm seeing it in social media a lot, is folks don't need education on what to do with a bank account. They need money. They're not poor because they don't have financial literacy. They're poor because they don't have money, and because this system doesn't pay people. And so it's, how many nonprofit people go out and get a job at McDonald's because they're not able to make ends meet because of what they're paid in the world that's supposed to be taking care of poverty. And so it really reaffirms for me what you're saying, Carl, in terms of that whole, and it's trust-based philanthropy. It is what does that look like? And who would be affected by that? There's a piece of me that says that if we can crack this nut in a couple of different ways, all of which have to do with money, has to do with compensation, has to do with, if we can crack this nut, that can ripple into the for-profit world. There's a piece of me that really believes that.
One question I think comes up in what you're talking about, Hildy, which I think is a polarity question, which is being relationship-based is wonderful from a human side, but it can also be detrimental on a bias side. So when I hear there's no application, I then think, well, then only the people who have the relationship then have access. And is there some filtering going on the relationship side that we would need to be considerate? So I think there is still a systems component to this too, and that's sort of where that polarity is, which is, it's trust-based, obviously, but it also, we need to make sure that it's equitable and equitably accessible, or being accessed equitably. So, because all the foundations will say, oh, we're accessible, but what we see is the outcome is that it's not equitable access that's actually happening. So I think as we think about this, because if we're talking about trust and principle-based funding relationships, I'll just call it that, we also want to, my hope would be that there are actually some systematic controls put in place that really raise questions and continue to challenge around equity and that funding piece, because I think that that's one of the challenges. And I guess also around that systems piece is, I would think, again, the United States has all sorts of eco-political constructs around fundraising, donations, and taxes. And, you know, I would hope that we would see both in the regulation as well as just in society at a norm, redefining social investment so that it's not philanthropic, but it's actually structuralized as a societal norm, AKA taxes, because that's the mechanism we have for doing it. But
yes. Yeah.
you're giggling.
Yeah. There's a part of me that is, all of these are people who will be affected by anything we do. There's a bigger part of me that is, we need to stop talking about fundraising. We need to stop talking about philanthropy. We need to stop talking about these systems as if they are God-given and they are the only options. That my hope and my dream is that much as we did with the role of the board, that we can blow this up and start over again, and ask different questions about what would good look like for resourcing the change that we want to see, and absolutely changing the societal norm of less and less taxes and more philanthropy. Really create significant inequity.
For me, it keeps going back to trust. I'm listening to Charles Eisenstein, The Ascent of Humanity, and he talks about, living in the gift, which means to trust. When you give a gift, there is no expectation of return, right? And I recently discovered, I forget the term, but it's modern finance in the sustainable green world that has no expectation of return. It's investment. It's blended capital. We're combining different forms of capital. Some expect a return, interest, right? Less trust. Some have no expectation of return, more trust. It's gonna go back at some level. And to piggyback Hildy on this company, which is doing some kind of microfinance, is a company in Australia named FastPay. They're doing installment-based kind of financing of consumer goods. So you can afford that piece of clothing or that gadget. They'll let you have it and charge the merchant a certain percentage to facilitate the transaction, and then you get 4 installments to make a payment. Wildly successful because millennials don't trust banks and credit cards. This is kind of what they were validating. There's a certain inherent distrust of interest. And they've heard the horror stories. I watched this, Money Explained on Netflix, and it's one of the worst, right, phenomena, in modern time, the student loan crisis. So trust is at the core, I think, of good and what leads to great outcomes. As you said, money is a problem. People get money. Most of them do good, right? I think this company that it's in Australia, it's like a 1% default rate. Most people will pay. And the more you pay, the more, obviously a chance you get. And they only charge if you're late. It's like a flat fee for lateness. So I think Audre Lorde says, well, we can't build, the master's house with the tools, right? And all that. We're trying to avoid elements of the system as it is. But I can't help wondering, what are the synergies of where, yes, we're in this world where capital kind of runs the game, and some of us want to gain and benefit from more capital, and others need that capital. They just need a bit more trust to allow them to get a chance to show that they're going to do good. So there's something there around this trust piece that is really essential in allowing both sides to participate and achieve a better outcome, with an invitation to do good and to trust, and not a condemnation. There's a lot of pieces in there I'm still trying to sort out.
I think we all are. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's beautiful. Eli, thank you.
One of the things that strikes me, and has always struck me, is the competitive nature of this existing system. And that, Carl, you were talking about how it's a waste of resource toward whatever your change or goal or thing you're trying to address, that how much time and energy is spent on filing grant proposals and monitoring and responding back. So it strikes me, though, that there's two ways to generate resource in that system. One is you go and you apply for grants and do whatever. The other is you need to make yourself the go-to place for addressing that issue. And I'm the best food bank in town. And I hate to pick on food banks all the time, but they're an easily understood model. I'm the best food bank in town. That's not the point. The point is, what's the nature of poverty and hunger in the community, and how is that being addressed? And the funding models that have existed really create a competitive environment. And that competitive environment doesn't aim at addressing the overall issue. It aims at who is doing it better than somebody else, whatever it is, as opposed to what's the final outcome of it.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. That focus on building of organizations. I saw a blurb the other day. It just made my skin crawl. It was a nonprofit resource center here in the States, and they were doing some workshop. It was capacity building to build a strong organization. And it's like, how about capacity building to build a strong community? How capacity building can make your organization the best in town. It's like, no, stop. Yeah, so thank you, Dimitri.
But also on your point that you're both making there, I've never quite understood the point of those individual capacity building programs, because they're all sort of like ships on a sort of a rising tide. So you're not actually changing the amount of money that's available for them to bid for. You're just increasing the number of hours that they then spend producing these ever more perfect applications. You're not actually changing anything. So your point that this one model of like the only way that you get better or that you become more efficient is competition. I mean, it's only one means of improvement. Collaboration, and as you say, building the field rather than building the organization is a legitimate method, but it's underexplored.
Yeah, yeah. So given all of the, let me read what I've got. Jackie, if you've got any others that I missed, please dive in. The people who will be asking for money, who will be affected by what we're doing, the people who will be asking for money, specifically for creating the future. That makes an assumption that we're going to be asking for money, but if we are, people who are being asked, people doing social change work who want to learn new ways of looking at resourcing. Some of the phrases that were used is a necessary evil and power relationships. The whole system of social change, and I love the thought, Carl, of the multiplying the time spent on fundraising. What a huge, huge waste of time that is. Social enterprise, in addition to just nonprofits. People curious about a post-capitalist / post-neoliberal approach in general. Foundations as leaders in the social change arena. The whole field of nonprofit professional advisors, consultants, academics, philanthropists who want to change things, specific to creating the future's mission, the people doing the work at creating the future, people who receive benefit from creating the future's work, people overall in community who are receiving benefit from organizations, people who have had trouble raising money in traditional ways due to equity issues. And then the whole issue of societal good, which is the everybody of if we are truly rethinking about how we fund and resource social good, then that affects absolutely everybody. Is there anybody I missed, Jackie? And then Carl. Okay, Carl?
So you prompted me to think about something then that I thought earlier on in the conversation, and it was one of the very first things that I learned from creating the future, and that is the distinction between money and resources. And some people are in a position to give money, but others aren't, but they can still give resources. And one of the things then that this potentially changes is that focus on resources, potentially it's incredibly empowering for people if they can contribute in other ways than sort of giving money. And by changing the way that we think about money and resources, that's quite powerful and empowering.
Yeah, what you just brought up for me, wow, is the people who want to create change and say, but I don't have any money, so I guess I can't. In our old diaper banking days, years and years ago, when small businesses would get involved in a million different ways, and they were amazing. They were absolutely amazing in all the different ways that they would get involved. And to the one, they would say, I wish we could do more. I wish we could really give you something. And they were giving us stuff we really needed. But they never realized that by their sharing their truck, so that we didn't have to buy a truck, so that we could go and that they saved us $20,000 or $40,000 and all of the upkeep on the truck and all of the personnel to drive the truck. They saved us all of that, but they gave us a truck for an entire month out of the year. And they kept saying, but I wish I was really giving you something, which was cash. And there's something about feeling like you can be a part of change and you can make a contribution. I can't tell you the number of times over the years that we've invited someone to be on the board and their response was, but I don't have any money to give. I mean, there's this whole monetizing expectation that the only thing that matters is the money. And you really raised that for me, Carl, in such a huge way of shifting that you are making a huge difference. And no, you don't have any money, and that's okay. You're giving your time, you're giving your thought, you're giving your passion, you're giving your car, your whatever. I think that's societally huge.
Keep thinking about time, treasure, and talent, right? Expanding out what philanthropy means. A lot of us just go back to money. But yeah, time is maybe even more valuable, right, than dollars. So I wonder if that's going to be part of our thought process too.
Years ago, when I wrote my book, Friendraising, and it is all about community engagement. It is all about what does it take to really build an army of support. And I was a consultant, so I was doing workshops. And invariably, some fundraiser would sit through the workshop, and after about 2 hours, they'd raise their hand and they'd say, all right, I get all of this engagement stuff, but when do we ask them for money? So the next question in catalytic thinking is, what would it take to involve all these people in the conversation? You know, who's going to be affected is all very well and good, but what does it take to engage them in this conversation?
At the risk of sounding sarcastic, not asking them for money. I wonder how many potential conversations get closed down because like one of the very first questions is, can I have some money, please? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this way of thinking is potentially empowering because it may open up a broader range of conversations that otherwise wouldn't have happened for whatever reason, whether it's awkwardness or lack of money or, yeah.
Ooh, that just raised another party who will be impacted in my mind. And that is people who, and we sort of touched on it, but people who are in organizations, whether they are board members, whether they are staff, small organizations, especially who don't have professional fundraising staff, who hate asking for money, who write grants because they don't want to have they love building relationships. They don't want that relationship to eventually go, and can I please have $10,000? I think there's a huge number, and especially again, small startup organizations.
I think that there's going back to the what will it take to Carl's question, or comment, is really when we're talking to people more transparency. So because I think that, you know, and I think what that transparency is around, you know, ensuring transparency around our values and beliefs of how systems work, and then also much more clarity around assets. I think this is true of all organizations, but that, you know, we shouldn't be asking for money, we should be asking for assets. And we should be asking for assets in a way that shows our competency of understanding what it actually takes to do what we're doing. And sometimes that's the missing link. Like, it's easy to ask for money, because if I actually had to describe what it is that I use your money for, I would get tongue-tied, twisted, and all I could talk about is the tonnage that I produce. I couldn't actually tell you about my organizational design, my theory of change, which, like, those are the things that you actually have to have at your disposal. So I think, you know, from when it comes to engaging people in this, we need to have people who are versed in what it takes to do the work of creating the future, so they can speak to the values that build trust, the assets that are required.
And I guess to clarify, I'm not necessarily thinking about what would it take to have people who, on behalf of creating the future, can create conversations with all of these people. I'm talking about, as we are talking about designing something, what will it take to engage all of those people in co-creating that with us?
Mm-hmm.
I think there has to be lots of fellowship, lots of chances to get together and share stories and be in community. I belong to a group by Charles Eisenstein called A New and Ancient Story on Mighty Networks, and it's just a beautiful place. Every time I just go there, I feel so nourished because everyone's on this kind of plane of gift, of imagining the more beautiful world. So there's get-togethers, there's people helping each other with GoFundMes. You know, people are feeling safe to ask for help, to offer help. So this chance, there's multiple events happening around, you know, deep topics, you know, being a man in today's world, you know, being a modern elder. It's this onboarding for new people who are new to the community. So just a really fertile place to find fellowship, I think can further asks and offers.
What else? And I really love that. What would it take to involve all of these people in our conversation so that we're all moving forward together? I think that it's a huge piece of it, Eli, of building that community.
Especially when it's hard to get together in person. It's never been more complicated to get people in a room.
Yeah. What needs to be in place for folks to join this conversation? What do they need to have? What do they need to know?
Well, I think first of all, they need to know what your values are, which we've got. Because I think often that, like, contrary to all the sort of the scientific philanthropy stuff, people don't give because like the pig is a kilogram or whatever, a pound fatter on market day. They give because they have some sort of sense of shared mission and shared values with you. And then I think they probably need a sort of a sense of like, where is this heading? What's your vision? What's and I think we've got that as well.
Mhm.
And I think increasingly you've got to help sort of people understand how are you enabling them to make social change rather than they are helping you to make social change. If I mean, that's not really an original thought, but sort of that, I think that's just sort of where people are today. So we've got to make sure that we can sort of help them relate it to the problems that they want to solve in the world.
Yep.
I was thinking that I know, a lot of people might come from a place of frustration, being frustrated with the system. But I'm reflecting, I'm actually, again, because I had just read Vu's post this morning, one of the things that sort of sparked me, and I think is really critical here, is faith that there is another option. Because I think a lot of people don't believe there's another way to get the money. To be crass. So I think they need faith that there is actually another way that this could happen, which may mean that we need people who have some of that demonstrative experience to be able to share. Whether that is donors who have made it I don't think we're getting, well, I shouldn't say I don't think, but, Eli, going full back to what you were saying, like Mackenzie Scott, like she clearly has demonstrated you can do this differently. So, funders like that, foundations that have said, hey, yeah, we do this differently than the way it is. I know here in DC, we have something called the Diverse City Fund, which is very much a community-driven, community decision-making, grant-making entity, focusing in on particular community-based organizations run by community leaders, all of that. I mean, it's very, so like they're a demonstration, even though it's a tiny scale, of there are different ways. So I think there's sort of this balance of those who have demonstrated, so that people can feel more faith and trust that there is a different avenue that's there. Because I think that it's a little bit more than just the exploration. I think particularly in this space, because if we think about the psychology that we're working against, which, I mean, the fundraising psychology is just brutal. I mean, it is literally, I mean, not only, Carl, you're zero sum, but it's like to fail is to fail. Like it's absolute. I mean, failure is absolute in this realm. And I think we're really so conditioned to that people have so much anxiety that it's like, even if there's a better way, I'm not willing to risk it because I know the way that's going to get me $3, and $3 is going to be better than going after $3,000 and getting zero.
It is survival. It is,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. We are fighting against the survival part of our brains, and all of the norms that we are fighting against are the ones that are how to feed that survival brain. You're absolutely right.
So I go back, I think going back to what Eli said, if we can create a space of ease, the sort of anti-anxiety space for people to explore a different path, I think is really critical.
Yeah. What we have created, we being this whole system, the competition thing, when you were mentioning the competition thing, Dimitri, before, one of the things that people will constantly raise is, yes, but competition creates innovation. And what I realized a long time ago is that competition for an end goal may create innovation. So Branson and Musk and all those billionaires who decided that that's where they want to go, they're competing to be the first out there. Yes, that creates innovation. But competition for the means to survive creates fear. And what we have done by not seeing that difference, by forcing people to compete for the means to survive, we are constantly triggering the non-thinking, fear-driven part of our brains. So in addition to everything else, maybe one of the things that people need to know in order to look at to step into this conversation with us is the brain science of what the current system actually does to us. Where the physiology, this is not somebody's philosophy or somebody's ideas about fundraising. This is the science-based physiology of what happens when we are put into the current system. We cannot operate at our best. We cannot simultaneously trust and compete. And so I think that's a huge, I'm really glad you raised it, Justin. It's a huge piece of it.
Speaking of competition, the thing that always comes to my mind is the return on investment, and the idea that we raise money, resources, Carl, expecting that return on investment. And we expect that return on investment as a funder, donor, whatever. Not all of us, but many do. And I always love the line. I'm trying to remember who it was. I know we've talked about this before, Hildy, who talked about what's the return on investment of your kid. You're raising a child. What's the return on investment on your child? And are you approaching it from that perspective? That, oh, here's someone who's going to, give me a big return when they grow up, so I'm going to invest, $100,000 in raising them. There's a shift that takes place when you think about it from the perspective of what is the outcome that I'm looking for, and that if the outcome is what am I going to get back, and I talk about Mackenzie's approach. I don't think she's looking at either credit or how much she's going to get back from this. She's looking at outcome. And I think that that's really important to be thinking about. For me, it's always important to be thinking about when I think about a competitive environment. What creates that? What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish by that? And what is limited by that? And so much is limited by that in terms of human interaction, in terms of the other comment I wanted to make was on when we, Hildy, you mentioned the diaper bank, and years ago we're doing that. One of the things that we did is we would talk to people without, as you're, you mentioned earlier, Carl, not asking for anything. We're certainly not asking for money. We were asking for wisdom, and that engaged them at a level that they had not been engaged in before. And they felt they didn't feel threatened. They didn't feel like we wanted to, put our hand in their pocket, thinking about funders at this point. We honestly went up and said, what do you know about this issue? Or what has your experience been, or whatever. So it created a human interaction with people around those issues. So those are two things that always stand out to me when we're talking about this.
Thanks. But part of me is really excited, not even part of me, all of me, is really excited to have this conversation be beyond just us as a board and small group of community members. I think that there is tremendous power in facilitating this conversation among all of the people that we talked about. Because I think what we have the opportunity to do is to, we have to raise some capital. We have to raise some money in some way. We need to be able to have people take positions that they need to be paid a decent living wage for. And the process of doing that can generate knowledge and wisdom and different approaches for the rest of the world, the rest of the sector, the rest of the so sort of our changing things by doing it while we're doing it. I'm not being very articulate, but our sort of being the guinea pig, I think it comes back to the thing that we've been talking about in terms of this new program of our being the guinea pig and bringing people into that conversation. We can change things while we're building our own infrastructure. The process of our building our own infrastructure can actually be a process of changing things. And I think coming back to what Eli said about bringing it into community, it makes it not just us. We all care about the same outcome. We all want, everybody that you mentioned, that we all mentioned over the past while we've been talking about it, everybody wants the same outcome. We want it to be better. We want it to be more life-giving. We want it to be more reflective of the values that we have. This could potentially change things for everyone and us. We're in the everyone. Because the one thing that I don't feel comfortable doing is having this conversation be just us. If all of these people are affected, they need to be involved. So what is everyone's pleasure? For what's next? Because I think, or do you even agree that we need to engage more people in this conversation? That is this a conversation that you feel that can just be a board conversation, or is this a conversation that if all of these are people who are going to be affected, could be affected, that we engage them in that conversation?
Why have our values? Sorry, Eli, after you.
I was just going to say that I would love to see an event with everyone in the room, everyone who's in any way attached to this work, in a room with breakout sessions and just collective brainstorming at scale, everything recorded, just like we have in these board meetings. I think that would be great. And then whatever comes out of that could be content to invite others in.
Carl?
I was just going to say I have our values on the screen in front of me, and it would almost go against our values to not have more people affected. Well, in fact, it would go against our values if we didn't have more people involved.
So the next steps then are
well, I think we have to start sort of thinking about realistically then what would that look like? What would that look like from a funder perspective? Would funders even come to a conversation? Would they be prepared to share their insight on whether we are just well-meaning idealists, or whether they've got practical ideas about how we might assemble a coalition of the willing? So you might think about doing this in terms of on a sort of almost a thematic basis. You might have a conversation with funders, and you might have a conversation with sort of Justin sort of talked about the group of people who are going out and doing the work. You might have a conversation with that group of people and see if it's possible. And then I think where I think we've sort of got to sort of try and get our thinking together is, okay, well, how do we then sort of turn those conversations into something that's a bit more tangible in terms of, okay, well, we all agree where we want to go, but there's clearly a job of work to be done in terms of then saying, okay, well, how do you get there? But I don't think anyone here is going to disagree on the direction that we want to get to, but probably any of us really know about exactly what it looks like.
That's where catalytic thinking comes in. Yeah.
So, I always go back to, one of your early questions, Hildy, which is, who else cares about this and what are they already doing?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what we're talking about, I think, are other conversations that are going on out there. And I sort of feel like if there are already people hosting the conversations that address some of our audiences, if we're looking at, sort of shifting belief systems and systems, like, we know that the community centric fundraising is having these conversations and pulling people together. So I think it's important to sort of recognize that we don't necessarily have to invite people to us. We could see where we could be invited to that is already some of these audiences, I think, that are in conversation. And I think that is a way. I think it is also modeling another one of our collective enoughness, which is we don't have to create this space, this invitation, if it's already going on, or the nature of some of these exploratory conversations or engagement opportunities are happening for people to rethink funding and asset building models or asset engagement models for community-based organizations.
Two other places where I'm seeing it, the collective impact folks are doing some of it. Nonprofit Quarterly is taking on these issues in a very big way as well. Both the collective impact folks and Nonprofit Quarterly are doing it as sort of workshops and webinars, where they're having experts or seeming, I shouldn't even use experts, people who are starting to have the conversations, be in these conversations. But I think it's critically important that we join existing conversations. Absolutely, Justin. One of the things that I'm seeing from a very personal level is that it can't just be me joining the conversations. That is a space where each of us as board members who have been steeped in these conversations for years can be participating on behalf of creating the future, on behalf of us as individuals who want to make a difference, but identifying themselves as a board member of creating the future.
I think it would be, Justin, I agree completely with where this is going, what the next steps are. I think it'd be very helpful to have us all identify where these conversations are taking place, so that there is a data list of here's a group that's talking about this. Here's another group that's talking about this. Here is Eli, their conference, their meeting, their whatever, where this is being. So if you're in, that we can in essence also support each other with, where we are, what's happening, and who else is talking about this. Because I think we all have a certain number of, in our own mind, places, people, organizations where this conversation is going on, but those aren't necessarily shared equally. Those pieces of information aren't shared equally amongst all of us. So maybe one of the steps is to identify where those are going on and to look for opportunities to be able to engage and to learn from. I don't want to enter any one of these with the, where we know everything, because we don't. So that would be one thought that I'd like to.
Yes.
I agree, Dimitri, and it's great to have these meetings, and I think we see some emails going around, but having a platform to discuss and put resources in and riff off of each other's discoveries is essential. And I know that's a separate conversation, but I think that's one of the things that's really slowing down momentum on the project here.
Yeah, we are starting in September, the very, very first of beta of the experimenting program is going to be around designing and developing and working with folks who already have platforms that work for everything that we need from a platform. We haven't yet seen one we love. What I'm seeing we can all be doing in the next month, and then coming back together in the month to continue the catalytic thinking questions, because we got through question 1, which is great, because you can't really get on to question 2 until you've got other people in the room. What would good look like? It's not for us to define, it's for all of us to define together. Is that each of us seek out at least one of these conversations and attend and participate. That also each of us have at least one conversation with one type of person who is on this list, whether it is a foundation person, whether it is a philanthropist, whether it is a social investor, that we have one of these conversations with someone on this list. And that we come back in September at our meeting and see what's next from there, what we're learning, and how we can apply that to our own continuing the questions in catalytic thinking. How does that feel? Yeah.
The only thing I would add.
Switch you.
The only, and to that, addressing what Eli was talking about, to even if it's a wiki page or a Google Doc or something where we are engaging with And so, a place to go to be able to upload this information to the collective brain here, so that we're all able to look at it.
Yeah. Yep. All right, we have assignments. And Angie will be happy, just like everybody always is in a meeting. You snooze, you are now assigned something. Any other thoughts? We can step sort of into reflection at this point. And Jackie, before we step into reflection, was there anything that you noticed or wanted to add before we reflect?
No, I think that ended in a good place. I think the important thing that I was hearing was that the relationships and the trust were so important. And so I'm glad that the conversation kind of ended with how do we build those relationships and that trust then? Because if that's going to be the foundation of the rest of it, that really needs to be the foundation of the beginning as well.
Wonderful. Always appreciate your thoughtfulness. We have a friend and a friend of Creating the Future who talks about beginning as we intend to continue. Begin as we intend to continue. And so if it's going to be about relationship, it's about relationship now. So yeah, thank you. So as you all think about our conversation today, what is standing out to you?
Was the first stab. I really like the emphasis on sort of this bit of the conversation about building the field, or building a sort of building an ecosystem of organizations rather than just building your own organization. That just appeals to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Something that I think is echoing here, that I'm just seeing so strongly echoed in so many places. And I know we've done work with this, but I feel like now we're sort of moving into a space where we're feeling the resistance, which is, work in the equity realm, work in this realm, it's really pushing up against values and beliefs that are institutionalized. And I think it is, I keep seeing sort of this pattern, which is, oh my gosh, like we need people to, understand what they value about this. And I feel like we are so often asking people to start that conversation on things that are really tough. Like we're saying, okay, what are your values about equity and humanity? And, and basically sort of what I'm seeing is, and I think most of us on this call have experienced it, is that we are not particularly well versed in general about being values driven or conscious of how values are driving decision making and organizational culture and organizational behavior and these patterns and these systems. And so it's basically, we're asking people to use a muscle that we just have not demanded of people. I mean, basically, it's not that people can't do it. It's just we've never done it. I mean, I'm in a process right now of revisiting a code, and I realize it's an ethics code, and the words value or values or what you value never comes up. They have all these euphemisms that sort of dance around it, but nowhere is it declarative about, your mission and your values. And we're analyzing it from an equity and diversity. And I'm like, well, gosh, there's a fundamental flaw in that we don't even have the ingredients to have the conversation, because we haven't raised values and beliefs up as something to be at this core design element that we like call out. And so I feel like this conversation is also kind of running into that, which is, much of what we talked about is changing a belief system around how community work is resourced. I mean, that's sort of at its fundamental, and what we believe about wealth and money and assets and accessibility and all of these things. And so my reflection is just the recognition of the, I don't want to say frustration, but the first inklings of a Sisyphusian experience, which is like, here we go, sort of thinking about pushing this onto something that we need to figure out how to make it ready for it, because we're so ill versed at doing this. And I feel like we consistently at Creating the Future, we keep running into that because we're values based. So then every decision is values based and every action is values driven, with the expectation that we are going to engage people at a values driven level. And it's so I don't know if this is making sense, but it's a theme that I'm seeing, and I see it happening here again too, which is, okay, what do we need to think about with regard to how we find the points of purchase for this conversation that actually move us forward in resource development, in a system that we know is going to push back against. So, again, I don't say that with a sense of reservation or frustration. It's more of just a sense of the weight that we are bearing in this.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Eli, Dimitri, what is standing out to you all?
So for me, when I heard Justin talk about this weight of being in a system that is steeped in white supremacy, and the other supremacy that we don't hear about, which is male supremacy, we don't talk about that as much, which is a serious problem. The whole thing, right, is steeped in oppression and exploitation. I watched this documentary called "Exterminate All the Brutes." It's really, really difficult and compelling documentary. So it is really hard. It is really complicated, right? I'm in this group called the Zebras, and we're kind of like looking at alternatives to venture capital for mission-driven businesses. And there's a lot of conversation about, what do we do with the VC community? Do we, are they going to be part of this? Or are we going to be messaging anti-VC because it's of its extractive nature at the core? So, but at the end of the day, right, the needs of all humans are the same. We're hunter-gatherers, that dived into abstraction and live in worlds mostly consisting of symbols and images. But yet we still have this core need to be around others in community, and we live and die in those relationships. None of us can exist, survive in the wild alone. So it is possible to reimagine and come back to this place of innocence, but it's going to take, I think, leading with those kind of tough conversations, in terms of the just rampant injustice that surrounds all of these systems, including the people that are going to be asking for money. So there is no easy way out of it. But I think by confronting it and being vulnerable about it, like Justin was saying, is essential to really having that nuanced conversation that invites others into a new story without condemning them or blaming them.
Yep. Thank you. Dimitri?
I'm sort of moved, first of all, by both Justin and Eli's reflections here. Those are big things, both in terms of the Sisyphus imagery as to what we are working on, not shying away from it, and then the scope of what we're talking about from the perspective of, thousands of years of history, and that, we're sort of the tip of the spear of trying to push that back, and or if not push that back, push the curtain aside to make it visible to folks. So it makes me think about a couple things that were talked about earlier. One was faith in the option, and I'm really thinking about that. We have faith. How do we engender faith in this option, that approach? And then the kind of final thing that you talked about, Eli, and I'm thinking about that in the context of the comment, a space of ease, having something that feels comfortable to folks, even though it's a big mountain ahead of us. We're looking at climbing that together, and it's okay. How we approach it in our minds will make always makes a difference as to whether it's hard or easy. People can accomplish amazing things when they don't think they're hard, and they don't dwell on the fact of how hard something is. They just take the next step and the next step and the next step. So it's kind of a couple of reflections here.
You're muted.
There we go. I was scribbling down. People can accomplish a lot when they don't think it's hard. There's a big part of me. I am really reflecting on the timeliness of this. That we're not alone in having these conversations. One of the differences, what I'm seeing in people who are convening these conversations, is the difference creating the future has always been. We're dealing with the same issues that people are always discussing, but we're living them. So Nonprofit Quarterly, yes, they are a nonprofit, they're a tax-exempt organization, but they're not doing this because this is the way they want to fund themselves. This is their mission, is to bring about these conversations. The same with the Collective Impact Forum, the same with I'm trying to remember, community-centric fundraising. For them, it is individual fundraisers who are looking to change systems, but it's not an individual organization that's saying our life is going to depend on this. That's that feels right. That it has always been. We've always said that there's nobody whose job is to experiment on their own systems and really see what are alternatives and what works. And most of the experimenting that happens is on other people. Consultants experiment on other people. Academics experiment on other people. We're experimenting on ourselves. And so that this just feels really, really good to know that there's community around us, that the time is right, that people are having these conversations, that it's going to directly impact us, and that we get to be part of that, and get to say, okay, everything that y'all are talking about, we're going to go try it on us, and we're going to report back what that looks like, because the intent is that the whole field rise, not that it is just benefits one organization, but that this has to benefit the whole field, and that just feels really, really good, and it feels like the timing. In all of the work we have done, we have been ahead of our time. Visionary conversation now is happening. When we started having vision-based conversation 20 years ago, people said, "Isn't that cute?" So it feels really, really good to the timeliness of it, and to know that we're in community with others, and that we get to apply it to ourselves and report back and say, okay, here's what that looks like. So thank you all. Any other thoughts before we retire today?
That was exhausting.
Then we've done our job.
I want to know how many miles Eli has put in during this meeting.
I know. Oh.
I think it's something like 1.5, maybe. It's great to release the stress and
Very good.
That's great.
come
I
back to
like
my
it.
body.
I like it. I like it. I like it a lot. Cool. Well, thank you all. And again, Jackie, thank you for the amazing job that you do in documenting all of this stuff that makes Carl tired. We'll see you all next